I'm Mia Collins, and my life changed the moment I saw her commanding those sled dogs like some kind of Arctic goddess. There I was, hunched behind my easel in Augusta's Riverside Park, trying to capture the way winter light bounced off fresh snow, when this brunette powerhouse came racing through my field of vision. She wore a red expedition jacket that made her green eyes pop even from 50 yards away. Her voice carried across the frozen landscape as she called commands to 6 huskies, each word crisp and confident. The dogs obeyed instantly, like she spoke their ancient language. Gee, ha! Her commands echoed off the snow-covered pines. I should have been sketching the landscape, but damn it, I couldn't stop drawing her. The way she leaned into turns, how her brunette ponytail whipped behind her, the athletic grace of someone completely in her element. I'd lived in Augusta my whole 32 years, and never seen anything quite like her. Then it happened. She pulled the sled to a stop maybe 20 feet from my hiding spot and looked directly at me. Those green eyes met mine, and for a second, the whole frozen world went silent. You've been watching for 10 minutes, she called out, not accusingly, just matter of fact. Artist? Ice sculptor, actually. I stood, brushing snow off my jacket. Mia Collins. Julia Phillips. She stepped closer, and I caught her scent, something like pine and leather and winter air. What's an ice sculptor doing sketching dogs? Before I could answer, the temperature dropped like someone opened a freezer door. Dark clouds rolled in fast, the kind of sudden weather change that makes Mainers nervous. Blizzard coming, Julia said, scanning the sky. You got somewhere close to wait it out? My studio was 3 blocks down Main Street. As the first heavy snowflakes started falling, I found myself saying, "Follow me." We barely made it. By the time I unlocked my studio door, the wind was howling and visibility had dropped to maybe 10 feet. Julia secured her dogs under the covered loading dock while I cranked up the propane heaters. Damn, she said, stepping into my workspace. This is incredible. My latest piece dominated the center of the room, a 7-foot sculpture of a woman emerging from an iceberg. Smaller works lined the walls, each one capturing different aspects of winter that most people never notice. You really see it, Julia said quietly, running her gloved fingers near but not quite touching my iceberg piece. The way ice moves, how it lives and breathes. Most people think it's just frozen water. Not if you've spent time in the real Arctic. She turned to face me. I lead expedition teams up north, Alaska, northern Canada, sometimes Greenland. The storm rattled my windows, but inside, surrounded by my ice sculptures and standing close enough to see snowflakes melting on Julia's eyelashes, everything felt strangely warm. Coffee? I offered. Looks like we're not going anywhere for a while. She smiled, and something shifted between us. Something that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. 3 weeks after the blizzard, Julia showed up at my gallery opening wearing a black dress that made me forget how to breathe properly. I'd been preparing for this exhibition for months, but suddenly all I could focus on was how she moved through the crowd like she owned the space. You came, I said when she appeared beside my centerpiece, a massive ice sculpture I'd titled Arctic Dreams. Wouldn't miss it. She studied the piece, her green eyes tracking every curve and detail. This looks like the Beaufort Sea during spring breakup. You've been there? Led 3 expeditions through that region. She stepped closer to examine the texture work. How did you capture the way ice shelves crack? You've never been to the Arctic. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I studied photos, documentaries, satellite imagery, but mostly I just imagined what it might feel like. Your imagination's pretty damn accurate. The way she said it, low and appreciative, made something flutter in my chest. I watched her examine each piece, explaining technical details that most gallery visitors ignored. She understood the sculptures in ways that surprised even me. I have a proposition, Julia said as the crowd thinned. My next expedition launches in 6 weeks. Northern Alaska, mapping uncharted ice formations. What if I commissioned you to create something that captures what we find up there? You want me to sculpt something I've never seen? I want you to work with me. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through expedition photos. Video calls from base camp, detailed descriptions, real-time updates. You'd be creating art about the Arctic while I'm actually living it. The idea thrilled and terrified me equally. Collaborating meant staying in contact, talking regularly, sharing something creative. It meant not losing touch with this woman who'd walked into my life during a snowstorm. When would we start planning? How about tomorrow? I could show you the expedition route, explain what we'll be encountering. She paused. Maybe you could teach me something about ice from an artist's perspective. We met at my studio the next afternoon. Julia spread topographical maps across my work table, while I gathered tools and ice samples. She traced routes with her finger, describing wind patterns and ice density variations with the passion of someone truly obsessed with their work. Here, she said, pointing to a region marked in red. This is where satellite imagery shows unusual formations, perfect for your sculpture inspiration. I leaned closer to see the details, my shoulder brushing against hers. She smelled like that same combination of pine and leather, with something else now, something warmer. What makes this area special? I asked. The ice moves differently there, creates these spiral patterns that nobody's documented up close. She looked up at me, and suddenly we were inches apart. Your sculptures already capture movement better than any photographer I've worked with. Maybe because I think of ice as alive. It is alive. Her voice dropped lower. That's what most people don't understand. I reached for a chisel to demonstrate a technique, and Julia's hand moved at the same moment. Our fingers touched, and damn if it didn't feel like an electric current shot straight through me. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Sorry, she said, but didn't sound sorry at all. Don't be. We stayed like that for maybe 5 seconds, hands barely touching, looking into each other's eyes like we were trying to solve some puzzle. Then Julia stepped back, clearing her throat. So, the commission. Are you interested? Yes. The word came out more breathless than I intended. Definitely yes. 2 weeks into our collaboration, fate decided to play a twisted joke on both of us. I'd been meeting Julia at her expedition headquarters downtown to review ice formation data, when the ancient elevator in the Whitmore building decided to call it quits between floors 3 and 4. Perfect timing, Julia muttered as the lights flickered and died, leaving us in complete darkness. Emergency power's out too. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. How long do you think we'll be stuck? Buildings from 1952. Could be hours before they get repair crews here. She sat down against one wall, surprisingly calm for someone facing an indefinite wait. Might as well get comfortable. The small space felt even smaller in the dark. I settled against the opposite wall, our legs almost touching in the cramped elevator car. Outside, February wind rattled the old building's windows. Tell me something, Julia said after we'd exhausted small talk about expedition equipment. What made you choose ice? Most sculptors work with clay, stone, metal. Ice is honest, I said, surprising myself with the admission. It doesn't lie about its nature. It's beautiful, dangerous, temporary. Everything else feels permanent until it's not, but ice tells you up front it won't last. Sounds like you're talking about more than art. She was right, though I hadn't realized it until she said it. My ex-fiancé used to complain that I was too distant, too focused on temporary things instead of building something lasting. Ex-fiancé. Guy didn't appreciate an artist? Actually, Sarah was an artist too, painter. Said I was afraid of commitment because I worked with something that melts. I laughed, but it sounded hollow in the darkness. Maybe she had a point. Sarah, Julia repeated quietly. How long were you together? 3 years. Engaged for 6 months before she decided I wasn't ready for forever. I shifted position, accidentally brushing Julia's ankle with my boot. What about you? Ever come close to forever? Once. Her name was Carmen. Met her during my first solo expedition to Greenland. She was a documentary filmmaker. Julia's voice carried old pain. Lasted 2 years before she decided dating someone who disappears for months at a time wasn't sustainable. She couldn't handle the distance? She couldn't handle sharing me with the ice. Julia was quiet for a moment. Said I loved the Arctic more than I'd ever love any person. Did she? Have a point? Yeah, probably. Julia's laugh was bitter. Hard to argue when you're planning your next expedition before you've finished the current one. The building creaked around us, and I found myself moving slightly closer. Why the Arctic? What keeps pulling you back? The silence, Julia said immediately. Up there, everything unnecessary falls away. No noise, no distractions, just you and the ice and staying alive. It's the most honest place on Earth. Sounds like we both chose honesty over comfort. Maybe that's why Carmen and Sarah couldn't stick around. Julia's voice was closer now. Takes a certain kind of person to love something that won't compromise. Or someone who understands that beauty doesn't have to be permanent to be real. Exactly. Something shifted between us in that dark elevator. The conversation had stripped away pretenses, left us talking about love and loss and the choices that define us. When Julia spoke again, her voice was softer. I have a confession. The commission wasn't just about the art. No? I wanted a reason to keep seeing you after the expedition. Couldn't figure out how to ask without sounding desperate. My heart hammered against my ribs. Julia. I know it's complicated. My track record with relationships is shit, and you're probably not looking for someone who disappears for months at a time. I reached across the space between us, found her hand in the darkness. I'm not looking for easy either. When our lips met, it felt like everything I'd been searching for in ice, that perfect moment when form and feeling align. Her kiss was gentle but certain, like she'd been thinking about it as much as I had. We should probably talk about this, she whispered against my mouth. Later, I said, pulling her closer. Right now, I just want this. The elevator rescue took 3 hours. By the time we emerged, blinking in the hallway lights, something fundamental had changed between Julia and me. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, unsure how to navigate this new territory. Coffee? Julia asked. There's a place on Main Street that stays open late. I'd like that. The next 2 weeks became a series of coffee dates that felt more like intimate conversations between long-lost friends. We met every few days, sometimes at cafes, sometimes walking along the Kennebec River, talking about everything from expedition logistics to childhood fears. I used to think the cold would kill me, I admitted one afternoon as we sat by the water. Growing up in Maine, everyone expects you to love winter. I was terrified of it until I started working with ice. What changed? I realized I was fighting it instead of understanding it. Ice isn't the enemy, it's just another language. I picked up a small icicle from the riverbank. Once I learned to listen, everything became different. Julia studied my face with that intense focus she usually reserved for expedition planning. Show me. What? How you listen to ice. I spend months surrounded by it, but I've never thought about it the way you do. I led her to my studio that evening. The space felt different with Julia in it, more alive somehow. I selected several ice samples, each with different properties and formation histories. Close your eyes, I said. Just listen. I guided her hand to touch different ice surfaces, describing the sounds they made under pressure, the way old ice felt different from new ice, how glacial ice carried stories of centuries in its structure. This piece is aggressive, Julia said, running her fingers over a sample I'd collected during the last ice storm. It wants to expand, take up space. Exactly. New ice is ambitious. Old ice is patient. And this one? She touched a piece of river ice. Stubborn. It formed slowly, had to fight against current to freeze. When Julia opened her eyes, she was smiling. You really do hear them talk. It's not that different from what you do. Reading weather patterns, understanding how ice moves across landscapes. You already listen. You just don't call it that. Julia stepped closer, her hand still resting on the ice sample. I never thought about it that way. Maybe that's why your expeditions are so successful. You respect the ice instead of just trying to conquer it. Like you respect the material instead of forcing it into shapes it doesn't want to hold. We were standing very close now, the ice samples forgotten on my workbench. The studio felt warm despite the February cold outside. Mia, Julia said quietly. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened in that elevator. Neither have I. I leave for Alaska in 3 weeks. This timing is all wrong. Maybe timing doesn't matter as much as we think it does. I reached up to touch her face. Maybe some things are worth the risk. When Julia kissed me this time, it wasn't desperate like in the elevator. It was deliberate, like she'd made a decision and was committing to it completely. Her lips were soft but insistent, and I felt myself melting into her arms. I want to try this, she whispered against my mouth. Whatever this is, I want to see where it goes. Even with the expedition? Especially with the expedition. I want you to be part of it, even from here. She pulled back to look at me. I want to share that world with you. 3 days later, Julia took me to Bradbury Mountain State Park for what she called winter survival training. Really, it was an excuse to spend a full day together in the woods, learning how to read snow conditions and identify safe camping spots. The key is understanding that winter isn't trying to kill you, Julia explained as we hiked up the snow-covered trail. It's just being itself. Your job is to work with it, not against it. She taught me how to build emergency shelters, how to identify different types of snow by texture, how to stay warm using body heat and proper layering. I was terrible at most of it, but Julia was patient, encouraging, even when I couldn't get the snow shelter walls to hold. You're thinking like an artist instead of like prey, she said, helping me rebuild a collapsed wall. Stop trying to make it beautiful and focus on making it functional. Everything can be both. Fair point. Julia grinned. Show me functional beauty. I rebuilt the shelter, this time thinking about load distribution and structural integrity instead of aesthetics. It held. Better? Much better. You're a quick study. As the sun set, we built a small fire and sat close together on Julia's camping pad. The woods around us were silent, except for the occasional crack of settling snow and the soft sounds of our fire. I love this, Julia said, staring into the flames. The simplicity, just fire, shelter, and staying alive. It is peaceful. I leaned against her shoulder. I understand why you keep going back north. Do you? She turned to look at me. Really? I think so. It's like working with ice. Everything unnecessary disappears, and you're left with just the essential truth of things. Julia was quiet for a long moment. Then she cupped my face in her hands and kissed me slowly, deeply, like she was trying to memorize the moment. I'm falling for you, Mia Collins, she said against my lips, and that scares the hell out of me. Good scared or bad scared? The best kind of scared. 1 week before Julia's departure, reality hit like an avalanche. I found myself working obsessively in my studio, chiseling away at a new piece with more force than finesse. The sculpture was supposed to represent the Arctic landscape Julia had described, but it was turning into something angry and jagged. You're going to break your tools if you keep attacking the ice like that, Julia said from behind me. I hadn't heard her come in. It's not working. Nothing's coming out right. Because you're fighting it instead of listening to it. She moved closer, studying my work. This looks like heartbreak, not Arctic beauty. Maybe that's what it is. Julia took the chisel from my hands and set it aside. Hey, talk to me. 7 weeks, Julia. You'll be gone for 7 weeks, and that's if everything goes perfectly. No delays, no extended research, no emergency situations. I turned to face her. And that's just this expedition. There'll be others. There will be others, she admitted. This is my work. I know, and I respect that. But I'm terrified of starting something with someone who lives half her life in places I can't follow. Julia was quiet for a moment, running her fingers along the rough edges of my sculpture. Carmen used to say the same thing, that I was asking her to love a ghost. Were you? Maybe. But I never wanted to change for anyone before. She looked up at me. I want to change for you. I don't want you to change. I fell for the woman who commands sled dogs and reads ice formations like poetry. I just don't know how to love someone from 3,000 miles away. So don't do it from 3,000 miles away. I stared at her. What do you mean? I mean, maybe there's another way. Julia pulled out her phone, scrolling through emails. I've been thinking about this all week. What if you didn't have to stay behind? Julia, I can't survive in the Arctic. I can barely build a snow shelter in Maine. Not as team member, as expedition artist. She showed me her phone screen. National Geographic wants to fund an artist-in-residence program for remote expeditions. They're looking for someone who can capture landscapes that photography can't. My heart started racing. You're serious? Dead serious. The application deadline is in 3 days. It would mean intensive survival training, medical clearance, and learning to work in extreme conditions. But you'd be there, creating art about the ice while living on it. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I've never been anywhere colder than a Maine winter. I'd train you myself, personal intensive course before we leave. Julia stepped closer. What do you say? Ready to learn what ice really looks like? Before I could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. Sorry, I have to take this. It's my expedition sponsor. I watched her face grow tense as she listened to the voice on the other end. Her responses were clipped, professional, but I could see frustration building in her shoulders. I understand the concerns, Julia said. But the artistic documentation could provide valuable PR for future funding. More talking from the other end. Julia's jaw tightened. No. I don't think bringing an inexperienced team member puts anyone at risk if she's properly trained. My stomach dropped. They were talking about me. Fine, I'll call you back tomorrow with a decision. Julia hung up and stood silent for a moment. They said no, I said. They said it's too risky. That adding an untrained civilian to the team could compromise everyone's safety. Julia's voice was flat, controlled. They reminded me that I'm responsible for 7 other lives up there. They're right. No, they're not. Julia turned to face me. They're scared of liability and bad press. They think bringing a woman with no Arctic experience makes me look unprofessional. Does it? Julia was quiet for too long. I don't know. Maybe. I've spent years building credibility in a field that doesn't take women seriously. One bad decision could destroy everything I've worked for. The words hung between us like a blade. I understood what she was really saying. I was a risk she couldn't afford to take. So that's it then, I said. You leave next week, and we what, try to make this work over video calls? Mia, that's not what I want. But it's what you're choosing. Julia stepped closer, reaching for my hands. I'm trying to find a middle ground here, some way to have both. There isn't one. I pulled away. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're fooling ourselves thinking this could work. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. You love the Arctic more than you could ever love any person. Carmen was right about that. I picked up my chisel again. And I love my work, my studio, the life I've built here. Maybe some people aren't meant to compromise. Julia stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Is that really what you think? I think we're both scared of wanting something we can't have. And what if I said I was willing to try anyway? What if I said screw the sponsor's concerns and the professional risks? I looked up from my sculpture. Are you saying that? Julia was quiet for too long. The answer was in her silence. I should go, she said finally. I have packing to finish. After she left, I stood alone in my studio, surrounded by ice sculptures that suddenly felt like monuments to things that don't last. 3 days of silence stretched between Julia and me like an Arctic wasteland. I threw myself into my sculpture work, but every chisel strike felt hollow. The ice seemed to mock me, refusing to take the shapes I wanted, cracking in places that should have held strong. On Julia's last night in Augusta, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to her apartment at 8 p.m., my heart hammering as I climbed the stairs to her building. Mia, she said when she opened the door. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders instead of its usual practical ponytail. We can't leave things like this, I said. I need you to know something before you go. She stepped aside to let me in. Her apartment was sparse, functional, with expedition gear organized in neat piles across the living room floor. Maps covered every wall, marked with routes and elevation markers that looked like hieroglyphics to me. What did you need to tell me? I took a deep breath. I love you. Julia went very still. Mia. I know the timing is impossible. I know we've only known each other 6 weeks. But I love the way you see the world. How you respect things that could kill you. How you make me want to be braver than I am. I stepped closer. I love that you chose ice over safety, adventure over comfort. I love you too, Julia whispered. That's what makes this so damn hard. Then why are we fighting it? Because love isn't enough sometimes. Because I can't ask you to wait for someone who might not come back. You're not asking, I'm choosing. Julia reached for me then, pulling me against her with desperate intensity. Our first kiss was soft, questioning. This one was fierce, hungry, like we were both drowning and each other was air. We moved to her bedroom without speaking, communicating through touch and breathless sounds. Julia's hands shook as she traced my face, my shoulders, memorizing details. I pulled her shirt over her head, marveling at the strength in her arms, the scars on her hands from years of rope work and ice axes. I don't want to forget anything about tonight, she whispered against my throat. Our lovemaking was urgent and tender, desperate and careful all at once. I learned the landscape of Julia's body like she'd taught me to read snow conditions, paying attention to every response, every intake of breath. She loved me with the same focused intensity she brought to everything else, like I was a map she was determined to memorize completely. Afterward, We lay tangled together in her narrow bed, my head on her shoulder, listening to her heartbeat slow to normal rhythm. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked. "Tomorrow I get on a plane to Fairbanks, then a bush plane to base camp, then 3 days of hiking before we reach the research site. And after that? 7 weeks of mapping ice formations and trying not to think about you." Julia's fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "What about you? What happens tomorrow for you?" I go back to my studio and try to remember how to make beautiful things instead of heartbroken ones. We were quiet for a moment, the weight of separation settling between us. "There's something else," Julia said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about finding a middle ground." "Julia, hear me out. What if we tried video calls? Regular check-ins from base camp. You could see the ice formations I'm documenting, and I could watch you work on pieces inspired by what we find." The idea had appeal, but it also felt like prolonging inevitable pain. Long-distance relationships barely work under normal circumstances. This isn't normal circumstances. No, it's not. But maybe that doesn't matter. Julia turned to face me fully. "Maybe what matters is whether we think this is worth fighting for." I studied her face in the dim light from her bedside lamp. "Do you think it is?" "I think I've never felt like this about anyone before. I think walking away from you would be the stupidest thing I've ever done." She paused. "And I've made some spectacularly stupid decisions in my time. Such as trying to climb a glacier face during a whiteout, camping on ice that was obviously too thin, dating a woman who thought my job was a phase I'd grow out of." "Was it the job?" "No." "Dating women who don't understand my work?" "Yeah, definitely a phase I need to grow out of." I kissed her collarbone, tasting salt and something uniquely Julia. "Good thing I understand your work." "Do you? Really?" "I understand that it's part of who you are. I understand that asking you to give it up would be like asking me to stop working with ice." I met her eyes. "I understand that loving you means loving all of you, including the part that needs to disappear into wilderness for months at a time." Julia was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said, "The airport shuttle comes at 6 a.m. "I know. I don't want to say goodbye." "Then don't. Say see you soon instead." When my phone alarm went off at 5:30, we were still wrapped around each other, neither of us having slept much. I watched Julia dress in her expedition clothes, practical layers designed for extreme weather. She looked competent, professional, ready to lead a team through one of the most hostile environments on Earth. "Promise me something," I said, as she shouldered her pack. "Anything. Promise me you'll take pictures of the ice formations. Lots of pictures. I want to see what you're seeing." "I promise." Julia kissed me one last time, soft and lingering. "Promise me you'll keep working. Don't let missing me stop you from creating." "I promise." As her shuttle pulled away from the curb, I stood on the sidewalk in the pre-dawn darkness, watching taillights disappear down Main Street. For the first time since meeting Julia Phillips, I was completely alone with the silence. 4 weeks into Julia's expedition, I got the call that changed everything. I was in my studio at midnight, working on a piece inspired by the ice formation photos she'd been sending, when my phone rang. "Mia?" "It's Sarah Chen, National Geographic Expedition Coordinator." My heart stopped. "Is Julia okay?" "She's fine. Better than fine, actually. The documentation work your girlfriend has been sending is extraordinary." Sarah's voice carried excitement. "Those ice formation studies, combined with your artistic interpretations, have impressed some very important people." "I don't understand." "We want to send you to Alaska. Emergency artist addition to the expedition. Can you be ready to leave in 48 hours? I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Julia's digital transmissions of your ice sculptures have created a media sensation. The public response has been overwhelming. We need you up there creating art in real time." 2 days later, I found myself on a bush plane flying over the Alaskan wilderness, my stomach churning from turbulence and terror. The landscape below looked like another planet, endless white broken by jagged mountain peaks and frozen rivers. "First time in the Arctic?" asked Marcus, the pilot. "First time north of Boston," I admitted. "You'll be fine. Julia Phillips doesn't take on team members who can't handle themselves." The landing strip was barely visible, just a cleared stretch on a frozen lake. As we descended, I spotted colorful tents scattered across the ice and a group of figures moving toward the landing area. Then I saw her. Julia, bundled in expedition gear but unmistakable even from a distance. She was running toward the plane before it fully stopped. "What the hell are you doing here?" she said when I climbed out. But she was grinning. Apparently creating art that impressed National Geographic. I dropped my pack and reached for her. Surprise? Best damn surprise of my life. Julia hugged me right there on the ice, in front of her entire team, and I didn't care who saw. After 4 weeks of video calls and digital photos, holding her felt like coming back to life. "How is this possible?" she asked. Sarah Chen called, said the publicity from our collaboration was too good to pass up. I looked around at the vast whiteness surrounding us, though I'm starting to wonder if I've lost my mind. Probably. But that's what makes you perfect for this place. The team gathered around as Julia made introductions. Dr. Rodriguez, the glaciologist. Kim and Pete, the cartographers. Alex, the photographer who'd been documenting the expedition. They seemed skeptical but welcoming, though I caught a few exchanged glances that suggested Julia's personal life had been a topic of conversation. "So, you're the artist who's got Julia sending poetry descriptions of ice formations," Dr. Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "Poetry? Her field reports have gotten unusually creative since she started working with you," Kim added. "Yesterday she described a glacier face as dancing frozen lightning." Julia's cheeks reddened beneath her face protection. "They're accurate descriptions." "They're beautiful descriptions," Alex corrected. "Makes the rest of us look like we're writing grocery lists." That night, in the relative warmth of the expedition's heated research tent, Julia and I worked together over ice samples she'd collected. I set up my portable sculpting tools while she explained the geological significance of different formations. "This piece came from a pressure ridge about 2 miles north," she said, indicating a chunk of incredibly clear ice. "The way it formed in layers tells us about temperature variations over the past 6 months." I ran my fingers over the sample, feeling for the personalities within it. "It's patient ice, formed slowly, deliberately." "That's exactly right. This area doesn't get violent weather patterns. The ice builds gradually, maintaining structural integrity." Working together felt natural, like we'd been collaborating for years instead of weeks. Julia's scientific knowledge combined with my artistic intuition created something neither of us could achieve alone. "Watch this," I said, making a precise cut that revealed internal crystal patterns invisible from the surface. "Damn," Julia breathed. "I never would have thought to expose that layer." "You would have eventually. You understand ice better than anyone I've met." "I understand its practical properties. You understand its soul." As the days passed, our collaboration deepened. Julia began seeing artistic possibilities in formations she'd previously evaluated purely scientifically, while her technical knowledge helped me create sculptures that captured not just beauty but geological truth. "The way you work together is remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez told me one evening as we prepared dinner. "Julia's always been brilliant, but she's operating on another level with you here. She inspires me too." "That's obvious. What's also obvious is how much happier she is." Dr. Rodriguez lowered her voice. "Some of us were worried about her dating someone who wasn't part of this world. We thought it might be a distraction. And now? Now we think she's found someone who makes her work better, instead of pulling her away from it." The 6th night brought a blizzard that confined everyone to tents. Julia and I huddled together in her sleeping bag, listening to wind howl across the ice. The storm created a strange intimacy, cutting us off from the world beyond our small shelter. "I can't believe you're actually here," Julia said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Neither can I. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be sleeping on Arctic ice, I'd have laughed. What changed? You. Meeting you made me want to be braver than I thought I could be." Julia pulled back to look at me in the dim light of our battery-powered lantern. "You know what you've done to me?" "What?" "Made me see this place differently. All those years coming north, I thought I understood what I was looking for. But you've shown me things I never noticed before." She traced my face with her gloved finger. "You've made me see beauty instead of just data." When Julia kissed me, soft and careful in the confined space of the tent, it felt like a promise. The storm outside might have been dangerous, but inside our small shelter, wrapped in sleeping bags and each other's warmth, I felt safer than I had anywhere else in my life. I love you, she whispered against my lips. I love you too, even if you did trick me into becoming an Arctic explorer. I didn't trick you. I just gave you an opportunity to discover how brave you really are. 3 weeks into my Arctic apprenticeship, the expedition's harmony shattered like ice under pressure. It started during our morning briefing, when Alex casually mentioned photographing Julia and me working together on a sculpture. Got some great shots of your collaboration yesterday, Alex said, reviewing images on his camera. The way you two communicate without words is incredible. I caught Dr. Rodriguez's glance at Kim, who gave Pete a meaningful look. Something unspoken passed between team members. Everything okay? Julia asked. We need to talk, Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. All of us, tonight after data collection. The day dragged with underlying tension. Team members who'd been warm and inclusive suddenly seemed formal, distant. During lunch, I overheard Kim talking to Pete about professional boundaries and expedition protocols. That evening, the 6 expedition members gathered in the research tent while Julia and I sat across from them like we were facing a tribunal. This is awkward, Doctor. Rodriguez began, but concerns have been raised about the personal relationship between team leaders and how it might affect expedition dynamics. What concerns? Julia's voice carried dangerous calm. The publicity back home is getting complicated, Kim said. Media outlets are focusing more on your relationship than the scientific research. Some sponsors are questioning whether this expedition maintains professional standards. My stomach dropped. Are you saying our relationship is damaging the expedition? We're saying the attention it's generating might be, Alex said carefully. The National Geographic piece focused heavily on the romantic angle. Love on Ice was the headline. Julia's hands clenched. I didn't see that article. Because we didn't want to distract you, Pete added. But it's become a problem. The university is receiving complaints about expedition funding being used for publicity stunts. Publicity stunts? Julia's voice rose. Mia's work has generated more positive attention for Arctic research than we've had in years. Yes, but for the wrong reasons, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. People are interested in your love story, not our scientific findings. I felt sick. So it's my fault. It's not about fault, Kim said. It's about perception. Having an untrained civilian join the expedition midway, especially one romantically involved with the team leader, raises questions about judgment and priorities. Julia stood abruptly. Are you questioning my leadership? We're questioning whether personal relationships should take precedence over expedition integrity, Dr. Rodriguez said. The tent fell silent except for wind rattling the walls. I could see the conflict in Julia's face, torn between defending our relationship and protecting her team's reputation. What exactly are you asking? Julia said finally. We're asking you to consider how this looks, Pete said. A team leader who brings her girlfriend to the Arctic, uses expedition resources for art projects, and allows media coverage to focus on romance instead of research. Excuse me, I said, standing. I need some air. Outside the temperature was 15 below, but the cold felt appropriate. I walked to the edge of camp, staring at the endless white landscape that had become both beautiful and hostile. Julia found me 10 minutes later. They're not wrong, I said before she could speak. Of course they're wrong. Are they? Look at this objectively. You brought your girlfriend to one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Media coverage is focusing on our relationship instead of your research. Your team is questioning your judgment. I turned to face her. Maybe they have a point. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe I should go home. Julia stared at me like I'd suggested burning down the camp. You can't be serious. I am serious. This is your career, your reputation. You've worked too hard building credibility in this field to let me jeopardize it. You're not jeopardizing anything. You're enhancing everything I do here. Tell that to your sponsors. Tell that to the university administrators who think this expedition has become a publicity stunt. Julia was quiet for a long moment, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. What if I don't care what they think? You should care. This isn't just about us. Isn't it? Julia stepped closer. Because it feels like you're looking for an excuse to run away from something that scares you. Her words hit like a physical blow. That's not fair. Isn't it? The first time our relationship faces real opposition, you want to leave. just like you were ready to give up before I left Augusta. This is different. How is it different? You're still choosing safety over taking a risk for love. I wanted to argue, but part of me wondered if she was right. Was I using the team's concerns as an excuse to escape before things got more complicated? What do you want from me, Julia? To stay here and watch your career implode because people think you're unprofessional? I want you to fight for us, instead of assuming we're doomed. Before I could respond, Alex appeared at my shoulder. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. Weather station is reporting a massive storm system moving in faster than predicted. We need to secure everything and possibly evacuate. The next 6 hours became a blur of emergency preparations. The approaching storm was bigger and more dangerous than anything the team had faced. All personal conflicts became irrelevant as we focused on survival. Helicopter extraction is impossible in these conditions, Dr. Rodriguez announced after radio contact with base operations. We're stuck here until it passes. How long? Julia asked. Could be 3 days. Could be a week. As we reinforced tent anchors and secured equipment, the ridiculousness of our earlier argument became clear. Personal relationships and professional reputations meant nothing if we didn't survive the next week. I'm sorry, I said to Julia as we worked together to anchor her tent. For what? For being ready to run again. For not fighting harder. Julia paused in her work. I'm sorry too. For putting you in an impossible position. We'll figure it out, I said, after we get through this storm. Promise me something, Julia said as the first heavy snowflakes began falling. Promise me that whatever happens with sponsors or media or team dynamics, we don't let other people decide what our relationship is worth. I promise. But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you won't sacrifice your career for me. This work is too important, and you're too good at it. Julia reached for my hand. I promise we'll find a way to have both. The storm hit that night with unprecedented fury, trapping all of us in a fight for survival that would test every relationship on the team. The storm tested everything we thought we knew about survival. For 72 hours, the world outside our tents ceased to exist except as screaming wind and driving snow. Equipment failed. Food ran low. The radio went silent. Julia and I found ourselves sharing a tent with Dr. Rodriguez when her shelter collapsed under snow load. Personal conflicts became irrelevant when staying alive required every person to function as part of a team. Body heat conservation, Dr. Rodriguez said practically as we huddled together in sleeping bags, nothing personal about it. But something profound happened during those 3 days. Working together against impossible odds, stripped away pretensions and revealed what really mattered. Julia's leadership kept us alive, but my ability to remain calm under pressure proved valuable too. Even Dr. Rodriguez admitted my artistic eye helped identify structural weaknesses in our emergency shelter. You know what? Dr. Rodriguez said on the second night as we shared our last hot meal. The media can write whatever headlines they want. What you two have together makes this team stronger, not weaker. When the storm finally broke, we emerged to find a transformed landscape. The expedition site was buried under 6 feet of snow, but miraculously everyone had survived without serious injury. More importantly, we'd survived as a unified team. Helicopter extraction in 4 hours, Julia announced after re-establishing radio contact. But we've got time to document the post-storm formations. What we found was extraordinary. The storm had created ice sculptures more complex and beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Natural formations twisted and spiraled like frozen tornadoes, catching Arctic sunlight in ways that seemed impossible. This is what we came here to find, Julia said as we worked together to photograph and document the formations. Ice that tells the story of extreme weather events. I set up my portable tools, creating small sculptures that echoed the storm's natural artistry, but now Julia worked beside me, not just observing but actively participating, pointing out structural elements that would enhance the artistic impact. Try cutting here, she suggested. The crystal formation suggests the ice wants to split vertically. She was right. The sculpture that emerged captured both scientific accuracy and artistic beauty. You two are incredible together, Alex said, filming our collaboration. This is what the story should be about. Partnership that enhances both art and science. 6 weeks later, back in Augusta, Julia and I stood in my studio reviewing the exhibition that would open the next day. The walls displayed ice sculptures inspired by our Arctic collaboration, alongside Julia's scientific photographs and data visualizations. Convergence, where art meets Arctic science, had garnered international attention, but this time for all the right reasons. The focus remained on our work, with our relationship as a subtle backdrop that enhanced rather than overshadowed our professional achievements. The National Geographic spread looks incredible, I said, flipping through advance pages. They really captured what we were trying to accomplish. Better than Love on Ice, Julia laughed. Though I have to admit, that headline wasn't entirely wrong. Julia had made significant changes after the expedition. Instead of booking her next Arctic trip immediately, she'd accepted a position with the University of Maine's Climate Research Institute. The job would keep her in Augusta 9 months out of the year, with research trips during summer months. Any regrets? I asked. About changing your travel schedule? None. Turns out love doesn't require choosing between passion and partnership. It just requires finding someone who understands that both matter. Julia wrapped her arms around me from behind as we looked at the centerpiece sculpture, a 4-foot representation of the ice formations created by that massive storm. I have something to ask you, she said quietly. What? Julia turned me around to face her, and I saw something nervous in her green eyes. The university wants to fund regular artist-scientist collaborations. They're offering you a position as resident artist for the climate research program. My heart started racing. Julia. The position comes with expedition funding. We'd be traveling together, documenting climate change through both scientific and artistic lenses. She paused. Interested in becoming a professional Arctic explorer? I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The blizzard that first brought us together. The elevator that trapped us into honesty. The expedition that tested whether love could survive in extreme conditions. Are you asking me to be your research partner? I'm asking you to be my partner in everything. Julia pulled a small box from her pocket. Not a ring, but something better fitted for our relationship. Inside was a compass, engraved with coordinates. Those are the exact coordinates where we first worked together on the ice, she explained. Where I realized that finding you was like finding true north. Julia Phillips, I said, taking the compass. Are you proposing to me with navigation equipment? I'm proposing we navigate the rest of our lives together. Arctic expeditions, ice sculptures, terrible weather, and all the adventures still waiting for us. I kissed her then, surrounded by sculptures that captured the beauty we'd found in one of Earth's most unforgiving places. Outside, Augusta was experiencing an early spring, but in my studio, surrounded by ice art that would soon melt, everything felt perfectly frozen in time. Yes, I said against her lips. Let's see where true north leads us. 6 months later, we were back in Alaska, this time as co-leaders of an expedition documenting glacial retreat. I created real-time sculptures while Julia collected data that would help scientists understand climate change impacts. But the best part was working together. 2 women who'd learned that love doesn't require choosing between passion and partnership. Sometimes it just requires finding someone brave enough to follow you into the beautiful, dangerous places where the most important discoveries happen. Our love story became part of the permanent record, captured in ice, preserved in scientific data, and written in the coordinates of every place we explored together.